Part 28. Day 126. Buenaventura, Mexico. 7:46 a.m. The flat scrubland was already heating up for the midday snake roast as the sun crested the ragged outline of mountains in the distance, and yet the air was thick with moisture. The weather was confused, as it often is in Mexico. Sarah took little notice as she drove the open jeep along what passed for a highway, the wind blowing her hair like a chestnut flag. She was wearing sunglasses and was pregnant. Below the small, sweet swelling that would one day become John Connor was a .357 Colt Python revolver nestled safely in her lap. It was loaded, and she had learned how to use it. Very well. Pugsley Jr. sat next to her, yawning. It was an 83-pound German Shepherd, attack trained to kill anyone remotely unlike Sarah, should they make threatening gestures. It could be gentle, but Sarah never truly considered it her pet. It was a weapon. She had been driving all night, moving in the relative safety of moonlight, as she always did these days. Although she knew that should another Terminator come through time, which was a possibility she could not discount, the night would not protect her. She was her best protection. But she stayed low profile, more out of a sense of paranoia that chance accident might destroy all she had and that Reese and she had fought for. No inane traffic accident, no idiotic plane crash, no random act of violence must claim her life now. It was vital that she live. She had changed. It wasn't just the pregnancy, although her body had changed, with a not unpleasant heaviness in hips and breasts. She felt somehow richer in appearance because of it. The major alteration was internal, behind her eyes. She'd been able to measure the full distance of the gulf between what she once was and had become when they told her in the hospital that her mother had been murdered. She had felt the whole exploded jigsaw of those terrible 3 days falling into place. Along with that had come the grief, fed by all the other life-shattering tragedies. But she had channeled it in such a way so that it did not drown her. Then she jammed it into a metal box and welded it shut. Later, when she was stronger, she would take it out from time to time and let it wash over her. And then, by extrapolating from it, she could mourn in advance for the world that would be utterly lost. Taking that emotion, so real and wrenching, taking it to the nth limit, she could catch a glimpse of the future, with its loss so vast that it would forever defy all but the most abstract comprehension. And that made her stronger yet, because hate is a powerful emotion too, and so much more effective. And so she began the plan. When she was discharged from the hospital, she emptied her meagre bank account, collected her mother's life insurance, bought the attack dog, the .357 and the jeep, then set out on the road. South. All the way to the bottom of South America maybe. Get into the berth and raise John Connor, and prepare him for the war. Where it was safe from nuclear attack. Where it was serene and beautiful and windblown and... She was low on gas. Better fill up before going into the mountains. She pulled into the ramshackle gas station in the dusty bowl of land alongside the highway. She turned off the cassette recorder on the dash. She had been dictating the next section of the book, the survival guide for her son. She was trying to get it all down in case something happened to her before she could raise him to maturity, and to concretize it on a magnetic tape before she forgot the details. Already, a lot of what had happened was fading away, refusing to be brought back, because that would have also brought back the old Sarah, and you could not bring back the dead. In a way, the Terminator had killed her. Just before pulling in for gas, she had been saying, "Should I tell you about your father? That's a tough one. Will it change your decision to send him here? To his death? But if you don't send Kyle, then you can never be." Once in a while, when she faced this kind of paradox, she would grow dizzy and faint with time vertigo. You could go just a little mad thinking about it. She stopped the Jeep's engine, slipped the gun under the seat, and got out of the vehicle to stretch her legs. They were plumper now, even more pretty, and the scar had almost healed. The pin was there, holding together the bone the Terminator's debris had shattered. The same pin the Terminator had been fruitlessly searching for in the legs of those other Sarah Connors. Those poor women. Sometimes she felt an irrational guilt, as if those innocents had died for something she personally had done. In a way, they had. She just hadn't done it yet. How strange, she often thought, to be making history and all the time know it, and to know the impact. It made her feel significant, but then insignificant simultaneously. Almost as if she were a cog, a puppet of fate, a mere link in the casual chain. She knew there was more to it than that, of course. Her rage to survive, to will herself to survive, had determined the outcome, which then made that aspect of her character merely another element in the design. The snake eats its tail, and it always will. Pugsley growled softly and lowered his ears as Sarah scanned the gas station. Chickens clucked and fussed around the Jeep's big tyres, flustered occasionally by the rising wind. The station was an oasis of junk in the wasteland, about 2 kilometres beyond a town that had been little more than a momentary widening of the highway. Here, surrounded by Joshua trees and not much else, was a tired little building in the centre of what looked like a junk car farm. Rusting pickups rested on blocks, wheelless, their glass gone. They were mottled and dented vehicles of all descriptions, waiting apparently for others of their kind to die so the necessary parts could be salvaged to repair them. Some sleazy piñatas swung and twisted in the bursts of wind, their bright colours mocking the apparent lifelessness of the place. Finally, a figure appeared in the doorway, an old man, stooped and withered, detached from the shade and shuffled towards her. He might have been full yaqui, and his eyes were red-rimmed from too much of the cheap local mezcal. Sarah saw his eyes and felt a momentary chill. She suddenly had the absurd feeling that he could see into her future. It passed immediately, replaced by an even stranger thought. She was the seer. It was she who could see beyond the horizon, and like those throughout history who were touched by visions, she wished it were not so. The attendant nodded politely. Sarah groped for the pronunciation of Lena Altanka, but the leather-skinned proprietor cut her off. He spoke a little English and was overwhelmingly proud of it this far south of the border. He assured her he would. Fill it up, see. Sarah got back into the Jeep, for the wind was picking up, whipping hot sand into her face. She had a thought and hit the record button on the machine. I suppose I'll tell you about your father. I owe him that. And maybe it will be enough if you know that in the few hours we had together, we loved a lifetime's worth. She was struck then by how inadequate those words were. They could never convey the strength of emotion or the rightness of it. A snap whir startled her, and Pugsley sat up, alert. But it was only a little Mexican boy, maybe on the near side of 10. He was holding a camera, an old and dented Polaroid he must have liberated from a passing tourista. A photograph was rolling out the bottom slit. The boy spoke to Sarah too rapidly for her to understand. When the attendant came up, she asked him to interpret. He says you are very beautiful, senora, and he is ashamed to ask for $5 American for this picture. But if he does not, he says his father will beat him. Sarah eyed the scrawny, grinning kid in his hold-out t-shirt and then said, That's a pretty good hustle, kid. 4, 4. The boy gave her the photo, snatched the money out of her hand and danced away happy to have found another sucker among the infrequent touristas. Sarah watched the image form with a sense of her own future coming together. The eyes that solidified out of the white void on the Polaroid surface were her own. She watched the rest of her face darkening, a slow fade-in on the Sarah that was her now. Older, she thought, but it wasn't a physiological change, only a new set to the old mild features. There was a faraway look in her eyes, and she was smiling, just the slightest bit, but somehow it was a sad smile. Sarah set the picture aside, tossing it casually on the passenger seat among the hand-labelled tapes of her journal. As she reached for the ignition key, the photo was already almost forgotten. Pugsley sniffed it once, leaving a moist noseprint, the first of many abuses that would age the plastic rectangle before it would rest lightly in the palm of a soldier's hand as he crouched in the thundering darkness, the hellfire of the machine Reich raging above him. Sarah would give it to John, and he would then give it to Reese. This was the beginning of the circle. But of course, circles have no beginning or end. Sarah paid the attendant for the gas and started up the jeep. Wind tore at her and rolled tumbleweeds across the highway. The boy was chattering behind them and pointing towards the mountains. "What did he say?" she asked the old man. "He says there's a storm coming in." Sarah looked towards the sky and the gathering clouds. Sheet lightning fired behind them, like giant strobes. "I know," she said quietly, and put the jeep into first gear. Out on the road, she thought about Reese, and time, and history, and most importantly, destiny.